I believe we just hit record. Yep, so we are being recorded. We will be posting this recording as well as the PowerPoint slides on the Training and Technical Assistance Resource Center website, which you can get to right at the communityactionpartnership.com and click on National Training Center, and you will find the materials there as well. If you have difficulty finding them, shoot us an email and we can send you the information as well. We encourage you to register with the TNTA website. There's a lot of great resources on there. This is the 8th of our series of webinars through the National Training Center, and all the previous recordings are on there. So I encourage you to take a look at that at your leisure as well. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Cash and you here at the partnership to walk you through some of the technical details of today's webinar.
Hello, everyone. Start with the boring information first here. If you do have any issues with your audio, you are welcome to use the private chat function, or you can email me at cyiu@communityactionpartnership.com. If you were to lose your internet connection, you can get into just the teleconference. The information is on your event info tab. There will be polls that will be popping up throughout the webinar. We are doing a pre and post test of sorts. We do appreciate you participating in those. You can also put in questions through the Q&A box that is also on this right side panel. We will be taking questions at the end, and we will read them out. You can put them in at any time, though. If you were to lose any of your functions, you may use the tabs up in this corner here to try to get your functionality back. So without further ado, I guess we'll go into starting to introduce our speaker today.
Great, thanks, Cashin. As many of you know, we have utilized cap law services in the past for oftentimes board roles and responsibilities, which is great in terms of the legal aspects of board service. But we've had a lot of requests from community action organizations that we need to go kind of beyond the legal to how do we get our board members engaged, how do we keep them active, how do we find the right people to be sitting around the table. The human aspects of it can be incredibly challenging from a community action agency perspective. Today's presenter is Megan Johnston. She's a facilitator, trainer, consultant specializing in capacity building. Megan has worked with a number of community action organizations, governance, their boards, Head Start policy councils, management teams, is familiar with ROMA and certainly the tripartite board structure. She's been doing this work for over 20 years. So we're pleased to present Megan Johnston in today's webinar. So Megan, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Denise. Hello, everybody. I'm going to get started actually by directing you, as Cashin just did, to the right side of the screen and begin with our first poll. We're just going to ask you to identify the role that you play with your organization. So that will give me and the Community Action Partnership a little more information about who we've got on the line in terms of whether you are a board member, a staff person, and what specific role you play in those settings. So if you'll go ahead and do that, then we will move on with the presentation. I want to just say thank you to Denise and also to Cashin and Andy who have helped with the technical setup, and also to the Community Action Partnership itself for creating a forum like this. As Denise said, I think although many of you have taken part in the more academic discussions of the board's role, it's often problematic for boards to actually get the ball rolling with that sense of momentum that really has board members easily engaged and continuously engaged. So today we're going to be talking about board development in the more human sense, really trying to focus not on what you may have heard in governance training, but on things that relate to the human glue that holds the whole thing together and keeps it moving. There are many aspects of this, but my focus today is going to be talking about some very practical strategies for both recruiting board members and retaining board members, really from the beginning of that process, which starts with knowing the organization, starts with identifying the leaders who will most be able to help to do these things. And I'll walk right through sort of a chronological board development process. Now, you may find yourself at any time recognizing things that you're already doing or that you feel you couldn't possibly do yet at this point. I hope you will find yourself somewhere in this chronology. You have the opportunity to ask questions at any point. Please do that. And as we move along, we'll really be hoping to leave things with you that will allow you to go back to your boards and begin this process wherever you are in it. I'll be talking about particularly written tools that you will need. We will be offering some of those. They will actually, in addition to the PowerPoint, be available on the partnership's website following this webinar. I'm taking the approach to this that good board recruitment, when you lay the preparation groundwork for that, really contributes heavily to good board retention. So we're going to talk about both processes, but in some ways they're very interchangeable. They look at the same elements. We'll be talking about the issues that surround new board members coming in and actually becoming part of the group in a really meaningful way. My theory here is that new board members always change the culture of a board, and that existing board members are sometimes motivated to make change when new board members come in. So you may be doing recruitment and retention at the same time without even realizing it. We also will be talking about some of the structures and habits that you might pick up along the way that would help future recruitment and future retention. Okay, so here's our first poll. I'm going to ask you to answer that, and it appears to the right, and I'm going to move on to our next slide talking about...
It's actually already answered. Are you able to see them on your screen, the results?
I have not yet. There they are.
All right.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Going back a little bit to what you learn often in governance, we're going to talk just for a second about the technical environment that community action boards find themselves in. As somebody who works with community action boards as well as other not-for-profit boards, there are some particular challenges that you all face. In my opinion, there are also some particular opportunities that you all have, and I want to make a couple of those distinctions. Although most of our conversation will be about process, they say that every process needs a context, so here's our context. As all of you are aware, you're dealing with a tripartite board structure. By bringing representatives of public, private, and low-income sectors into your process, you're looking at people automatically that come with diverse skills, with diverse backgrounds. They also have very diverse life experiences, which is both a challenge to the process, and I think if properly handled can also be a big asset to the process. It's also built into community action, and this was on purpose back in the War on Poverty years, that there are very different views both of political situations, economic circumstances, and of course of group process and power and authority that are built into a community action board. That diversity is sometimes difficult. It's also something that gives you huge opportunities to board strength. So we'll be doing some talking about that. You are, of course, responding to complex human needs in the programs that you run, and from what I hear from my community action clients, most organizations are seeing those needs as more complex, sometimes more immediate, more serious. There is also a structure that you're working in that is complex fiscally and programmatically. So oftentimes we get very stuck when we talk about community action boards in talking about oversight. There's a lot of it. You have lots of compliance requirements. I hope that what we'll be able to do today is really go beyond the compliance aspect to talk about some things that are best practice and common sense in some ways. You also are in a position of advocating for issues that are not only not widely supported often in your communities, but widely supported nationally. It's a very challenging, as you know, funding environment for you. What does this add up to? It adds up to a time crunch. It adds up to scarce resources to put into board development. It adds up to staff and board members all feeling as though they can't possibly stuff another meeting into their schedule. What it brings to the process that I look at as a huge opportunity is that no one is really in a mood to waste their time or resources these days. It used to be that board service was in some ways social, that people would look at that as an opportunity to participate in their communities in a sense, not expecting the meeting to only take an hour or only take 90 minutes. I think we're really past that stage. So that's the challenge that we have in front of us. I think like any challenge, it's also an opportunity. And at this point, we're going to pause for another poll. This is part of the pre- and post-test process that Cashin referenced a minute ago. This one is about the best ways of identifying new board members, so I'll just ask you to answer to the best of your ability there. Okay, as you're doing that, the practical response that we're talking about today really has more to do with people than it does with structure. I'm going to be talking about matching individuals and the things that they have the potential to bring to your community action agency, but not to the one that it is now, to the one that it will be. You don't get the board you want next Tuesday, and a lot of this is about figuring out what you need to be cultivating in board talent, what relationships you need to be making before you need to take advantage of them. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about that in terms of that fit that's so all important. So the elements of that matching process really are you getting a grip on what I would think of as the core descriptive information about your organization, which for complex agencies like yours is tough, getting a handle on the characteristics that you think would advance your community action program at the board level. Now, we're still in the dreaming phase here, so this is not real people. This is who would be good, what kinds of talents and traits would advance your mission and your plans for the future. Then you're going to set about looking for people with those characteristics, and that's a very focused process when it's working right, driven by a board committee usually with support from the executive director or CEO, and it's about finding people with those characteristics in a variety of ways that we'll talk a little bit about. And of course, then you have to sell those folks on joining you. So the pitch is something that we'll be talking about a bit too. Once that is done, and here's the challenge, both for recruitment and for retention, you've got to connect those folks to other folks within the organization. People can connect to your mission, but first they'll connect to somebody who asks them to do something, including serving on the board to begin with. So that upfront human connection really can't be ignored as a central point. And it needs to be part of your strategy. Once you have sold someone on and begun the connection process, of course, then you are in the place of keeping life moving along, organizing your activities around a set of expectations and priorities that can help you make the board feel though it is moving along, even when it isn't. Part of this is maintaining momentum even through the places that challenge you. Okay, now I would hope that in your work with your boards and staffs within your organizations, you're always thinking about cultivating people. The very model of community action and the programs you run means that your staff and board leadership have opportunities to be out in the community, connected through coalitions, connected through the service that they have on other boards, connected through public-private partnerships that your organizations may be involved in. If you are successful in setting up a really welcoming recruitment strategy, you will have board and staff members always cultivating folks because they are able to really easily articulate who the organization is, where it's going, what it needs for the future, including what its challenges are, and they'll be terrific listeners. They'll be looking in every situation they are in for people who might show an interest in the issues that you are interested in as an organization, have the skills that you might need down the road. Remember, this is not an immediate gratification proposition here. And they will be making friends with people who know other people. My experience has been when you go to a board and say, well, we're looking for new board members, can you suggest somebody? All of a sudden, nobody knows anybody. If you go to them asking, can you suggest anyone that has this background or maybe affiliated with this group, all of a sudden that becomes easy. So this is one of the challenges in recruitment. So if we're to move ahead with this process, ask yourself this: are you ready to do this? Is your board developed to the point where you have at least one board leader who is committed to this process of changing the way you do board development? And then can you easily articulate the purpose of your organization? I'm not saying you need to recite the mission statement here. I mean a clear, factual explanation, very simple, the elevator speech we're always talking about what your organization does and what priorities are. These can be sophisticated or they can be very simple. And then you need to be able to link what those priorities will call for in board members. So if one of your priorities, as it is for a lot of my clients these days, is to build your fund development effort, for example, that related board need is someone who has been affiliated with an organization who does board fundraising so that they can bring at least a comfort level with that activity to the board, if not very specific skills. You're going to need to be able to talk about leadership culture within your organization as well. And this is one of the places where it starts to get down to how honest can we be about this when we're talking to people in the community. Because if leadership culture is tough right now, or if you've been having difficulty with board attendance, or you've been having difficulty with the commitments that board members are making or not making, you're going to want to be honest with candidates about the fact that you're in a tough transition right now, and here are the things you're making to deal with it, and this is how we hope you can help us with that. You're also going to be thinking in advance all the time about what the opportunities are, the real live board jobs that are available for these folks coming in and for people that may already be involved but may not be engaged. Some of that comes through an orientation. Some of that comes through committee work. Some of that comes through other activities of the board. But one of the big issues is that people don't come in knowing what it is that you expect them to do, and they'll come in stronger if you've helped them understand what you expect them to do even before they say yes. So let's walk through really a chronological process of board development. And again, because this is a cycle, you may find yourself understanding at any point that your organization is here right now, say at step 4, as we go along. Really what I'm going to be describing is steps that you can take that will move the organization toward a more robust board development effort. And it begins with finding the folks that are going to help you do that. So if you're coming to this as a board president who knows that board culture needs to change, or if you're coming to this as an executive director that's been somewhat frustrated with the level of activity among board members, or you're coming to this as a board member who looks around and sees that you're the one that's showing up for every meeting and your colleagues are not, the place to begin is who's going to take responsibility for making a change. Many CAP agencies that I've worked with over the years have, for example, a nominating committee or something that they call the Public Participation Committee. I'm suggesting that what most organizations need to be looking toward is a very formally constituted board development committee whose year-round job is focused on making the board stronger. So this is not the nominating process that begins a week and a half before the annual meeting. Oh dear, we have to present a slate, who can we find? But something that has an annual cycle that begins with an annual assessment of the board and works through the year putting things in place that will strengthen the board and strengthen the board's focus. That group needs to be working with the executive director, but independently. And this is one of those delicate dances, of course, that we always do in the not-for-profit world between the managers of the organization and the governing board members of the organization. You cannot do a respectable and credible board recruitment job without the support of the executive director. Similarly, if the executive director is doing the recruitment, then it does not strengthen the board. One of the first things that is an impression to a new board member coming in is, do other board members know what they're doing, and can they describe that to me? What team is it that I'm joining? Or am I working for the executive director? Clearly, the board-to-board approach is a stronger one, but you can't do that in the absence of the expertise of your executive director. You also need, in that process, someone to chair that committee that can move it along. Now, it doesn't need to be a governance expert. It does not need to be someone who knows everything there is to know about what board members have as their fiduciary responsibilities, for example. But you do need a good facilitator, somebody that can organize a process, somebody that's not afraid to ask questions, look for help, go online, attend trainings on their own until they feel that they're comfortable with the subject matter, and that has a record of follow-up, someone that you can trust to follow through. And by you, I mean whoever is the spark plug that's starting an interest in this process within your organization. Now, that committee's responsibilities, typically, I've just laundry listed the things that people often charge their board development committees with. Some of these are sometimes in other places. Begins with bylaws review and updates to the bylaws. This may not actually be done by this committee. It may be done by an executive committee or an ad hoc bylaws committee that forms every 2 years to take a formal look at the document. But the board development committee needs to be very familiar with the bylaws, particularly the pieces of the bylaws that relate to board selection in line with CSBG requirements for all 3 of the sectors, that relate to the way the board job is described in the bylaws, the way that the roles of officers and the way that the committees are described in the bylaws, as well as the actual election process, because this committee would be responsible for all of those things. The committee is also responsible for that regular board assessment that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and this is actually one of the really key tools to start off your board development process. I was looking at the attendee list when you all first started coming on, and I recognized a couple of familiar names, people that I've had the pleasure to work with over the years who have done board assessments with their boards and taken from that information the facts about where the board sees itself at this current point in time that have allowed them to really develop some momentum working forward. This group will also be responsible for identifying and introducing prospective members, but they won't be doing that alone. They'll be talking with the executive leadership about that. They'll be talking with other board members about that, and they'll be structuring that conversation. And then, according to a recruitment strategy that they have put in place and communicated to the full board, they'll be doing the outreach to prospective members. They have election oversight, obviously, and they are also responsible for orienting people. So you see, this group plays a very key role in the life of your board. They're really the group that's responsible for the care and feeding of the board. So no matter what they're called, whether they're called the nominating committee or the public participation committee or the governance committee or the board development committee, they play these roles in the life of the organization. If you have a committee with a name like this and a list of charges like this that is not energized at this point, some of the later conversation will hopefully help you to get them energized. If you do not have one, it's a great opportunity to form one in this environment, which really requires all of us to step up to the next level in what we do, either as professionals or as volunteers, and really begin to create some momentum. We've got another poll here. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and respond to this one. This is about policy documents and the process. And in the meantime, I'm going to move ahead. Okay. So if you have a board development committee in place, whether they are active or not, what I'm introducing here as step 2 is to get that group discussing the organization's clear purpose and the priorities that the board has adopted in some way at this point in time. This can be as sophisticated as working with a strategic plan that your organization has put together, or as simple as pulling together a facilitated board meeting to have a discussion about key priorities for this upcoming year or the next 2 years. The point is to begin to focus. When you have a strategic plan, which you should have in place, that's the place to begin, obviously, and often that will have governance goals already written into it. So your board development committee will have its work laid out for it. If you do not have a strategic plan, there does need to be a set of board-approved priorities in place. And those can be a simple list of 4 things that the organization will be concerned with over the next couple of years. But if you're going to go out to prospective members, and if you're going to use it as a tool to nudge your existing board members into a greater level of activity, it needs to be board approved. It needs to have the credibility of board approval. There's also often other information that you have that will help a prospective board member understand how they can contribute to the organization. This is often either committee descriptions or some of the things that you publish in orientation materials. Again, we're talking about trying to gather the information that will help you. It will be essentially your kit as you begin to develop your pitch to new board members or to existing people that need to engage in a more meaningful way. The point here is to keep it simple and keep it very honest, but also I would add to that to keep it hopeful, because one of the sort of conventional wisdom things about board development is that it's human nature that people like to join a winning group. People like to come onto a board that has some good self-esteem, that isn't always apologizing for its function, that isn't saying, well, we know we should be doing this, but we're not doing it. That doesn't mean you can't be honest that you have challenges to face. It doesn't mean that you can't be straightforward with people that are coming in. And in fact, that's a way to engage people. We're at this point in our development. We're here. We feel that we need your skills as well as the skills of others to help us over this hump. Will you join us? There's nothing wrong with asking for help. But getting to that clear purpose and priorities is an important step. And then into that, you need to bring knowledge about the board from the board. Board self-assessments are done in a number of different ways, and there are various tools out there. There are a variety of things that are posted on the web. There are things that I've created that you are welcome to talk with me about following the webinar. There are many things that organizations have developed themselves that I have seen that are very good. The point here is that it needs to be a way for an individual board member to comment confidentially. This can be by survey, either online or on paper. It can be done by an outsider. It can be done by your committee internally. But the point is to get the board's opinion about how it is doing, as compared to best practices in the sector, as compared to the challenges that they recognize when they look ahead in strategic planning or in setting priorities for the organization. You also want to create, as a byproduct of this, a board matrix that gives you an idea of who you have and who it is that you need. This goes beyond the 3 sectors of board representation that community action deals with, and really gets to more the nuances of what skills, what other representations, what sets of contacts, or even personal traits are available to the organization now. And as you look ahead, what of those characteristics do you know you need to bring in this round of nominations, or you know you need to bring in, but you may not be able to mobilize that in this round because you haven't cultivated those folks yet, so it's your next set of priorities. You also need to take the board's temperature about whether they are feeling valued, whether they're feeling engaged, whether they're feeling that their skills are being used by the board. And all of this, of course, gives you fodder to come up with a plan to help address these issues, which can be either done by the full board or by the board development committee putting together a simple list of instructions, of priorities that will keep people focused and help them move forward. Now, I've loaded here a tool that CAPLOP has published recently, and it's available on their website and will also be available to you as part of the toolkit that the partnership will be putting up after this webinar. It's difficult to see all the pieces of this, but what essentially we're doing here is trying to create a visual image of everyone that you have on the board listed in the left-hand column, and then the characteristics or representations, kinds of diversity, years on the board, committee service, everything that may describe that board member. And that list that runs across the top of the page obviously would need to be customized to your organization's situation. So if in a given year, for example, you are most trying to diversify your geographic representation, or you need more cultural and ethnic diversity on your board, or you have realized all of a sudden that every single one of your board members is between the ages of 50 and 70, and maybe you need to think about bringing in some younger board members, you would highlight those things, and you would look at the current board to see how you stand, and then begin to develop what we call a profile for recruitment. This, even when you are not immediately recruiting people, is something that you'll need to educate your full board on, so that everybody's very focused on what we are looking for in board members for the future. Doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow, but that's the cultivation process. It's that long time making friends before you need them process, and if the board can establish this matrix and develop a profile, every board member will be able to be promoting that all of the time in all of their relationships. The outcomes of this assessment I've mentioned so far are that matrix and a profile that comes from it, but it also will result in recommendations that affect ways in which you might just change your board function either immediately or as part of a longer-term plan. And some of the things that come out of board assessments, in my experience, are, say, we've been doing orientation the same way for the last 5 years and it seemed to be going okay, but when we hear confidentially from board members, they say, well, I really didn't get the and that would indicate a need to revamp that orientation process. It's also often important that people comment on the committee structure. Maybe there are things that need to be done there. The current trend, both in community action and among other not-for-profits, is to have a smaller, tighter committee list, to really focus on developing the leadership of those groups, to change that leadership on a fairly regular basis, and to make the priorities of those committees much clearer than we sometimes have in the past, so that it's a really refreshed process on a regular basis. The need for policy changes also often come out of this assessment process, and certainly one of the themes that we're hearing a lot about, not just in community action these days, is leadership succession. So it may be something that board members recognize when they're asked to assess their own involvement in the board and the board's function overall. It may be something that you know going in as a board development committee is a big issue for you. Okay, here's another poll question about approaching prospective board members, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we move on. Now, step 4 in this process, given that by now you all have rushed right home and formed a really active, well-led board development committee, is the beginning of strategy development. And the reason this is important is that you are beginning to form what we hope will be very intentional relationships with people that you may not want to bring into the circle of your organization right now, but you think you may need them for the future, or you know you may need them right now. And in order to do that in an efficient way, you need to actually sit down, put pen to paper, work with your matrix and your profile, and talk about what those strategies will be. Cultivation, whether or not you are trying to recruit new people, is going to go on all the time. But specific recruitment, if it's done right, is one of the biggest aids to retention that you can possibly do as a board. So if you are, for example, this year, you may not be recruiting any new board members to fill seats in this coming board year. But if you are not comfortable with the level of activity and engagement of your board, looking at some of these steps in recruitment and getting down on paper what your approach is to new board members also helps you think about how you should be dealing with existing board members on an ongoing basis. So the steps that are listed here under defining the roles and steps in recruitment are really the right down to the nitty-gritty. Who's going to talk to people? What are they going to say? How is that contact going to be made? What information are you going to share? What are you going to share when that person says yes? And then what actions are you going to take to fulfill the regulations under CSBG law to bring people onto the board legally and appropriately? This, of course, is all going to be the work of the Board Development Committee. One of the things that is a problem for recruitment, and when not properly prepared for, can really blow up a recruitment effort, and some of you may have experienced this, is that if board members, for example, are asked to suggest names to the Board Development Committee of potential board members, but instead of saying that to the Board Development Committee, they say it to the person they're thinking of, and then perhaps that person's background, skills, representations are not the ones that the organization needs most this year, so they don't get an immediate call, and in the meantime, you've compromised a relationship that potentially you need for the future. So a recruitment strategy is like any other visibility effort that you make as an organization. It can have real impact on your reputation. It can help you improve your reputation, or it can really trash your reputation. To back it up, you need some tools, because board development committees are going to come after you that are going to need to repeat this process and continue to build on it. And there are certain written pieces that can be a huge help to that. Clearly, the bylaws clauses that relate to everything surrounding bringing people on, keeping them on, getting them engaged in the work of the board, the length of terms, the number of term renewals that board members can have, the way the bylaws describe the meeting process, all of those are important as tools to have with you when you begin to talk about bringing people on or further developing current board members. The profile we've spoken about, a board job description sounds like a simple thing, but by renewing a board job description on an annual basis, that's fairly simple, but makes it very clear to board members what the expectations of them are. If that is supported by leadership, looked at every year, kept up to date, and kept visible to people, it can be a very powerful retention tool and a retention to get people out of that board seat and into action when you need them to be. You'll also need a list of your current committees, their memberships, and what their priorities are, because one of the things you're going to be doing as part of a recruitment strategy or a renewal strategy to get people engaged is to try to connect them to a smaller group than the full board. One of the things that board members most often say to me when I'm talking with groups about some of the issues they're encountering in feeling engaged is, well, I wasn't quite sure why I was here. Nobody really asked me to do anything, and it took me about 2 years before I really felt like I could participate fully in meetings. Getting somebody hooked up to a mentor, sort of a board buddy, or to a committee that's actually doing meaningful work of the board is a great way to do that. We all really enjoy the feeling of being useful and of feeling engaged in something that we feel we can have an impact on. And for newer board members or less experienced board members or people that are not sure of themselves in this setting, who may turn out to be some of your most valuable board members, they're going to be a lot more comfortable sitting around a table with 3 people than they are sitting around a table with 10. There are a couple of other recruitment tools listed here, and the letter to prospective candidates and the board calendar are things that I have put into the toolkit that will be posted later for you. And here's another poll question for us about board calendars and what it does to help you recruit and retain board members. And while you're looking at that, I'm keeping my eye on the clock and I'm going to move on. At this point in your process, you are going to be thinking about organizing the pitch you're going to make to folks in the outside world. And this is really just a tickler list for you in thinking through this. The place to begin, because we're talking about human connection here, is why are you doing this? What makes it interesting to you? Why do you think it's important? So as an executive director, this is a conversation you can have with several of your board members to get them thinking about this. If you are a board member, think back to why you joined. Sometimes there's a difference between why you joined and why you're still there. Sometimes you join not knowing much about the organization, but you've become more engaged, and telling that tale to someone else, human being to human being, is a great way to bring them into the organization's circle. You also need to be thinking about what you are inviting people to participate in, and we've talked earlier about getting a grip on the organization's purpose and direction and future. But one of the things that you also want to be able to offer to new candidates is, what are the things we're working on right now? What special initiatives might this person get engaged in, or might translate a broader mission down to actual actions that this person could take at the time that they come onto the board. If you are engaged in change, if you are responding to funding changes, for example, or programmatic changes, or you are making changes to your board structure, that's a great thing to say in your pitch as well. We're at this process in our development. We're looking for skills to help us get over this next hurdle or strengthen this part of our operation. Expectations being clear, of course, is another big issue. This is something that we're notoriously bad at in the not-for-profit sector. We're pretty good at saying in an academic way what it is that we expect people to do, but it's a very difficult thing to go back to a board member who isn't doing those things and speak to them about it and try to get them to do those things. This is something that technically is also the work of the Board Development Committee, looking at that board assessment, keeping track of who is not attending meetings, for example, over long periods of time, and then following up either as a Board Development Committee or the board president speaking on behalf of the Board Development Committee to really hold people accountable for those things. So if your bylaws say that someone can't remain a board member after they have missed 3 consecutive meetings, but people do it all the time, you likely have found the reason that you're having trouble with attendance. There's another piece of this, too, that is sometimes a sensitive issue. I think it's not so much. But most people do things not just for altruistic reasons. We say that that's our reason for serving on boards, that we're doing this out of our need to provide service, and that is really a strong belief for many board members. But for everyone that does something as a volunteer, there is something they're getting out of it. So if you have been raised to do service, to be involved in voluntary activities in the community, if you are someone that because of your spiritual background or your professional background has strong beliefs about giving back, or if you are someone who is interested in learning more about the community, these are all good reasons to become part of boards. So setting down and putting it on paper what your board offers its members is another good way to begin that pitch that you're going to use with members. Now, one of the things that we have a real obligation to do, I believe, in any not-for-profit, and specifically in community action with our 3 board sectors, is to offer leadership development to folks. People sometimes are not necessarily the best leaders because they've had the most experience with it or because they have the highest community status. And we want to be able to recognize that and bring people along. We want to be able to help people become good facilitators of community process, no matter where they are in the socioeconomic realm or in terms of the way they feel about their own status in the community. So people are looking for learning opportunities, people are looking for leadership opportunities often, or they may not know that they have leadership qualities, but you might recognize those qualities in them. That's a good way to bring them in. People are very attracted to the idea of being part of a community solution. You just have to figure out the way to say it. So we're going to start with this human connection idea, that essentially you are going to make a connection with somebody first, and then you're going to begin the process of talking about the organization. So you're going to start with who you are, who the team is, who you are inviting people to work with. People want to be part of a team that understands itself. They want to understand why they're being asked to be there, beginning with your own connection to the organization and the connection that you have to other members of your team on the board is a great way to begin an entree with a new person. In all of these bullet points, you're going to just be focusing on how can you connect this person to this aspect of the community action organization. And again, this is not just for new folks coming in, it's for existing folks. This may be your once-a-year renewal meeting where you refresh your committee charges, the board votes on a set of new committee leaders, people sign up for committees, and by the way, let's talk about how the plans and priorities of the organization relate to us as individuals. What is our stake in this organization? As a pitch to a new member, this is the way that you're beginning to develop that human glue. You are reaching out to them as a person who has a set of values and priorities themselves. How can you match those to the values and priorities of the organization? How can you get that person in touch with the people that your organization serves and talk about the change that the organization makes in those folks' lives? What is relatable about that to the person that you're approaching? And then, as we spoke about earlier, what are the opportunities for this individual person? So this is really not a script. This is you trying to understand who this person is that you're speaking with, whether it's an existing board member or a new potential board member, and how can you connect them to the experiences that this board has to offer and the expectations that this board has of its membership. I'm going to take another poll question here, talking about helping board members become more active. So if you'll look on the right and respond there. Okay. Now this piece, the next few slides as we wrap up here, is really moving on to talk about some of the things that as leaders in any capacity within the organization, at the board level, within the executive staff, staff members that may be the designated liaison to the board, how can we keep this moving? So these are retention strategies. They are also things that demonstrate leadership's commitment to board building right from the get-go, because you could not have formed that brand new shiny board development committee without a serious commitment by the leaders of the board to engaging in this process, to changing board culture. So in step 7, we're talking about leadership roles and routines. And the first one is really one of the things that is easy to bypass in the busy world of community action, where we don't have enough time to get the things done that we need to do in a day. But focus is an important issue. How can you keep the things on the table that are the most important to keep on the table? That's why when I talk about priorities, I'm less concerned with a very sophisticated set of priorities than I am with a simple list of the 4 things we're going to focus on this year, and how every board meeting agenda is going to bring those issues back so that board members are always understanding what the most important things are. One of the ways to do this, and also to support the board's fiduciary role in a way that makes that a very automatic process and a process that people can feel very comfortable with, that they are protecting the liability of the organization and their own liability, is to create an annual board calendar. There is an example of one done with a community action program in the toolkit that will be posted after the webinar. But the idea here is to, as either a board development or an executive committee, or as a combination of executive staff and executive committee members, is to put down in calendar format what are the major governance events that are going to be happening throughout the year first, and then to add to that on a continuing basis, what are the committee deadlines, when are committees going to be doing the heaviest work during the year's time, what are the deadlines for funding reporting, so board members will know to expect that if the CSBG year is starting in October, they're going to be seeing the proposed budget and program plan ahead of that date. It helps board members to know what those guideposts are that help them do their duty of care as a board member and keep connected to their fiduciary responsibility, but it also organizes their process. It organizes committee work. It keeps people focused on those most important things. Another step in this process, of course, and this is something that CSBG mandates, is that you develop and use a board manual. And that is really just a compilation of some critical pieces that every board member should have access to in terms of policies, organizational charts. Again, in the toolkit that will be posted, there is a good table of contents for such a manual. The thing that I would advise you to do is not to create the manual that has everything in it and takes a binder that has, is 5 inches wide and requires a wheelbarrow with an agency logo on it to get it to a board meeting. You really need to have the skinny version of the board manual, and that means that it's got to be condensed information. It's got to be the right information. It's got to be updated regularly. And because board members really won't do that on their own, there needs to be a process through which either the board development committee or other leaders make sure that those things happen, that the old pieces of paper get thrown out and the new minutes get added so that people have current information. And you never spend time looking around the room asking who brought their bylaws so we can see if we have a quorum. Other points here for leadership are to find ways to bring the board together outside of regular meetings. One of the things that I think is very true about the way that people bond as groups and work effectively together is when you get to see those folks in situations that are not the ones you usually see them in. There's actually been a lot of research done on this, that when people participate together, for example, in informal community groups, it makes their relationship and mutual trust stronger in their professional settings, for example. So bringing the board together outside of regular business meetings, either for occasional, and this is an important word, structured social events, because it's not just that you're going to get the board together to hang out as friends, you're going to get the board together with a purpose. And also bringing the board together for annual planning and development meetings is a good tool to use. You need to work hard at keeping that fresh. It can come off your board assessment and deal with some of those things. It can be related to strategic planning and checking in on it, any of those issues. But having that opportunity where there is a different agenda, a less formal ambiance, and some really productive facilitated conversation is a great idea. And then we have the sort of very simple common sense things, and that is that articulating consistent expectations, everyone who plays a leadership role brings the point home, keeps people focused, keeping those tools updated does. And in the end result, people watch what you do more than they listen to what you say. So having all of your board members making a commitment to be that board member that you'd like everybody else to be is a good place to start. Okay, let's flip it for just a minute here. Say you really wanted to create an ineffective board. Here's my advice about that. Have very low expectations. Downplay them. Try to talk somebody into coming on the board or staying on the board by letting them know that there really isn't much that they have to do. That's a good way to start. Wasting board time with a meeting that's poorly organized or that no one follows up from is another way to really kill board activity. Skipping orientation or leaving orientation to staff. This is a really biggie because no board member ever that I've known has wanted to volunteer for lots of additional meetings. But having an orientation that all board members are asked to participate in, where board members teach other board members about how to do board service, is a very critical thing. So by skipping orientation, you are really setting up a negative dynamic there. Skipping strategic planning will do that for you also, or just making it a staff duty that comes to the board at the end of the process so that the board does not have a level of ownership over what the organization's future looks like. And then we've talked before about ignoring some of the things that you say you expect. So ignoring poor attendance, ignoring the fact that people aren't preparing, ignoring a breach of confidentiality or an undisclosed conflict of interest is also a surefire momentum killer. On the other side of the coin, here's some ways to really build that board. People like to respond to a bar set high. No one wants to feel that they're not worthy of good, healthy expectations. So setting the bar high and holding people to that over time will weed out members of your board that are not willing to really participate at the level you need and will bring other people up. Calendaring critical events, we've talked about that. Doing your board assessment annually, the opportunity for annual planning and development, using a strategic agenda that gets right to those biggest strategic issues and brings in the board to talk about those critical priorities on a regular basis, and then ensure that you are making things happen that people are proud of is really another critical piece of this. So I think with that, what we will do is move to your questions. There is a list here of toolkit ingredients. there is also a page here that includes some web resources, including the Community Action Partnership. The ones I would point out to you here that are really outside the world of community action but tremendously helpful are the Nonprofit Quarterly, which is a magazine that also has an online version. It's a great resource for sort of cutting-edge stuff in the not-for-profit sector. There are also a couple of folks that work in editorial capacities there that have a long history with community action, including Rick Cullen, who's been a speaker at many community action events nationally and in my state. And Blue Avocado, which is a very informal e-newsletter. I believe it comes out about every, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks, I guess, that has a lot of great information. And of course, I'd also refer you to your state community action association. So let's move on to your questions.
Great, Megan. We did. Thank you very much. A very comprehensive overview. We do have a question submitted by an individual. It said, when you talked about signing up for committees, do you have any suggestions on how best to do this in the context of it's a tripartite board distribution requirements of CSPG, even to the committee level?
Yeah, as with most things with board development, a lot of upfront preparation is really the most helpful way to do that. There should be a group of folks, whether it's the Board Development Committee or the Executive Committee, that's sitting down with your current year board list at the time of year when you might renew your committees or assign committee membership, that will do some thinking in advance about that and make some specific invitations to folks, as well as asking for volunteers for the board, from the board. So you're putting a strategy in place and trying to look at that balance of participation, as well as some of those other things that show up in the board profile that we talked about, in the matrix, I'm sorry, that we talked about, to spread out not only the distribution across the 3 sectors, but also across some of the skill areas or experience areas that might be helpful to that committee's work.
Great, thank you. We're also, as we wrap up here and take the last few pieces, we're going to open up our post-test, which are the same questions that you saw as we went through the presentation. This is to help us demonstrate to OCS if there is a change in people who've answered the correct answers as we've gone through. So if you could just take a few moments as we wrap up here to answer each of these questions, that would be great. You can also pose your questions in the Q&A box to your right. But we have had a number of folks ask whether or not the PowerPoint will be available. The PowerPoint and a recording of today's session will be available within the next 24, 48 hours in the resource bank. The slides are currently posted in the resource bank, as are the number of tools that Megan mentioned as she went through the presentation. And we know we've had some audio problems today with at the initial part of the presentation with some things going in and out, so we'll make sure to send you the recording link as well directly so you can use that at your leisure. We've also had organizations use these webinars with their boards. They may not have been able to be on the call today, but you may want to consider taking this recording and put a projector up in the boardroom or at a part of your board retreat or board planning session and spend an hour walking through the slides, play the audio presentation. All of that is free of charge, and if you need help setting that up, please don't hesitate to contact us here at the partnership. We can work with you to do that. If you have any other questions, please post them in the Q&A box. Currently, we don't have any other questions being posed. Megan, is there anything else that you thought of that you would like to cover but perhaps haven't?
I think that the major point to be made, and I hope this came through to you, is the point that you are thinking ahead in this process, always thinking ahead. So in some ways, your strategic plan and your priorities are your best tool for this. As I said before, if those are not in place, think about priorities. Use this as your excuse to articulate priorities that you may not have articulated other places so that you can gain that focus that you need. And I think that's about it.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. We just want to thank everyone who's on the call. We do have folks from all over the country, so thank you very much for being here. We'll get you out a link to the recording, and we hope you all have a great Memorial Day weekend. And we'll hopefully you'll be on a future webinar. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.